Hey guys, a little bit late with this video, but just wanted to do a report after the Spanish trip on this Rieju 500 Aventura. If anybody watched the previous videos, I picked up this bike. I bought it from Tim at Midlife Classics up in Droitwich, and I had it delivered one day before my Spanish trip. I did 12 days with the group down Plymouth, Santander, across to Valencia, all rural roads, back roads down to Almeria, and then back up. So about 2,200 miles. In total, then back up. A mixture of weather, all sorts from good to bad, wet to dry. And then the last few days, this has been on my A2 fleet for people to ride back to back. So it's actually been out yesterday and today, ridden by 12 people already, and actually it's finding good favour. So this is a bit of just a quick chat through about the bike, how I found it in Spain, what I liked about it, maybe what I didn't like about it, who I think it might be for. Just to answer some questions about it, really. You know, my interest was piqued by this bike, by John at Rally Raid, maybe 2 years ago. He said he'd seen a bike at Eichmer that had got the twin tanks, you know, a 500X, it's a Honda 500X derived engine with everything that you would ask of a long distance travel bike, 21-inch front wheel, 18-inch rear, long travel suspension, obviously the two 20-litre tanks to give a 600-mile theoretical range. And then in this case, it comes with the crash protection and everything else. And I think at that point, the bike was branded as Chinese. It's a Hangzhong something or other 500. So it's a completely Chinese design built bike, very much in the mould of the Benellis and the Vosges and the new Cove 510, etc. And Rieju have obviously picked this up and rebranded it to add to their European market. You can also get this bike in Russia and Ukraine. I think it's branded as a GR500, so obviously not a Rieju, it's a different name altogether. So the bike is finding itself in different markets under different names, which is a bit like the Mac Bar Montana, which became the Cove, which became the Jawa, which became the Lex Moto. So I think we're in a period of China establishing itself, and in some cases, like CF Moto, they're establishing their own brand and building their own bikes. And then in other cases, like this one, it's a Chinese manufacturing source, which then gets rebadged as a European product brand. Personally, I prefer the clarity and the transparency of the CF Moto strategy. I think it's more honest. You know, I think to me, rebranding a Chinese bike and giving it a European name and a European price, I'm not sure that really, it doesn't carry as much muster as maybe it once did. So we've got a twin cylinder parallel twin based on the 47 brake horsepower Honda CB500X engine. I think it's very much the same chassis, probably very similar swing arm. And then, as I say, we've got the 21-inch front, 18-inch rear, tubeless spoke wheels. We've got suspension which is adjustable for rebound and compression damping, also preload on the rear, and also I think it's compression and rebound on the back as well. I just forget. We've got aluminium backed handguards, and as I say, this comes as standard, as does the centre stand, which does hang a little bit low, and then pivot peg style foot pegs. Price for this bike list is £7,500, which is why I guess I've always been interested, but always thought it's just that little bit too much money. You know, I can see its appeal, I can see what it's got, but £7,500 is nearly £2,000 more than the CF Moto. It's nearly £2,000 more than the new Himalayan and the Triumph and everything else. And you know, for a bike that's not got the brand pedigree behind it, Rieju, it just seemed like a little stretch too far. The dealership's network isn't very extensive, I guess. Question marks over parts availability. And then also, what I frustratingly have found, you know, a lack of push for this bike, because I actually think it's got a lot going for it. Really captured my interest. So taking it to Spain was my way to test it, to test my own bike that I bought with my own money, taking it on a tour, which I was guiding my customers with. So it puts a lot of pressure on a bike to perform and to deliver, to be reliable, to be functional, to be enjoyable. You know, there's bikes that I've ridden on tours which I've not enjoyed riding, and it does take the edge off the enjoyment of a tour. So it puts a lot of test on a bike, really. And I've had some good bikes on tours this year, the Triumph 400X, the CF Moto 450, the KTM 390 Adventure. And I think that it's clear actually on these A2 days, or the last 2 days, it's clear to see in the A2 sector, it is a bigger bike. I think it's a bigger bike than an NX500 or a CB500X. It's got that size of a Benelli TRK 502, and therefore it feels a bigger bike than the CF Moto, than the 450 Himalayan, etc. And weight-wise, with both tanks full, it's 240 kilos. It's certainly not a light bike, and it's certainly not a diminutive small bike. It's got a big bike feel to it. And actually that's why it worked so well in Spain, and I think that's how I'd start this conclusion about how much I liked it, in that I thought it was a perfect Spanish travel bike. It was a perfect bike to roam across a big distance on, where there's not a lot in between the towns, there's a lot of empty stretches. The fuel range, first and foremost, you know, you could say, well, why do you need that much range? And certainly you don't need that much range. You can travel with far smaller tank than that, and I have travelled with far smaller tank than that. But I think what I found, what I enjoyed about it, is that I only had to think about fuel every third day. So I could do 200-mile days. My days are normally 200 miles. I can do the next day 200 miles. And then the third day, about midday, at 500 miles, I'd start to look for fuel. And you could say, well, what's the point of that? Well, I tell you what, it just takes a bit of pressure out of it. Certainly when you guide in a group or you organise in a group and you've got a lot of other things going on. So actually having to worry about your fuel on the third day, to me, it was a big benefit. And I think it takes away a little bit of that anxiety. And so I think it's a functional design. You've got the stopcock here, the knobs fell off, so I have got to get a replacement. That is the only error so far on this bike, the actual dials, which is like a cooker knob. I have tried my cooker knob to see if it fits, and it doesn't fit, but that's just come off. But that turns between tank one and tank 2. And you've got a button on the dash which alternates between the different fuel pumps for the different tanks. So you've got to synchronise the two. I think stopping to do it is better than doing it on the fly, because obviously if you get it wrong, it runs empty. There's no fuel supply, and then obviously that's not good for the pump. I found I got 19 litres in the rear, so not quite 20, and 19.5 at the front, so 38.5. I was doing about 80 miles per gallon, so theoretically it's about 670 mile range. I found I'd tap out at about 500 miles and get fuel. You've got a fuel gauge for both tanks. How does it make it ride? That's a big question. Does it make it top heavy? Well, you know what? At the minute that tank's full, it's not a light bike. You know, that's probably 225, getting up to 230 kilos, you know, which is equivalent actually to the Vogue 525. That's a heavy bike as well. I think all these Chinese bikes are heavy. And in fairness, all bikes are heavy once you start bolting stuff onto them and filling them with fluid. So I think comparing spec sheet weight to spec sheet weight doesn't always tell an accurate story, because some have got fuel in them, some have got parts bolted on, some haven't. So to me, it's a heavy bike, looks a heavy bike, feels a heavy bike, isn't a heavy bike. It's going to be too heavy for some. With the weight in the back, I find it drags its tail a little bit. It feels like you've just got a big mass of weight down there, which you have, but it still flows through the corners. You can still get it to hustle. It'll still turn well. You've got the twin discs up front, so it'll still stop well. The suspension's actually they're really good. I mean, China seems to be excelling at delivering more positive, progressive type of suspension. You know, I look around at some of the Japanese bikes, the CRF 300 over there, it's got very boingy, soft suspension, which limits your ability to push the bike. Whereas this, and same with the CF Moto 450, it does seem they set the bikes up to be ridden for a slightly more aggressive rider style. I have backed this off, I put everything back to sort of midway, and then softened it a little bit or each setting, and that seems to offer the best compromise between comfort and also control. And I've got it so it handles really well, you know, in the corners it's just well balanced, it's tractable, it absorbs the bumps well, it's good suspension, and obviously you can tweak it to suit. From a performance point of view, 47 brake horsepower, certainly when it was tight, when I set off, I thought it is a bit dry, it's a bit gruff, it's a bit lacking in delivery. Now it's got 2,500 miles on, and riding it today, actually, you know what, it gets up and goes. It needs revs, it's quite tall geared, which is different to a lot of the other bikes I've got on fleet here. You know, the CF Moto at 70 miles an hour will be doing 7,000 RPM. At 70 miles an hour, this is doing 5,600 RPM. It's a lot lazier, it's a lot more relaxed. Therefore, in terms of touring, if we're going to compare this to any other of the CF Moto, let's say, or a lot of other touring bikes, I'd say this is a more longer legged. It's a bigger bike, it's a heavier bike, it's a more relaxed bike. And I think it's a gruntier bike up high. So somebody asked me in the comment to another video, which this or a CF Moto. Well, if it's just for road touring, then this every day of the week. You know, it's got a bigger screen, it's got a bigger bike feel, it's got the twin tanks, standard. It's a great touring bike. Is it as good as a travel trail bike? Well, no, because it's heavier. The weight's higher. It hasn't got that lightness, that manageability, that flow that the CF Moto does so well. So, you know, which way are you going? Are you going to go on trails? Then I'd go for the CF Moto, because it still tours really well on the road, but it'll also trail ride really well. This tours really well on the road, and I think you could do some trails on it, but there is a weight here. I mean, the bike fell over in the wind on the trip in Spain, and it was a heavy weight, and it took two of us to lift it up. My luggage wasn't stacked very well. It was up here rather than down here, which didn't help its manageability, but it's a heavy bike, whereas the CF Moto feels like a light bike. So that's where I'd split the decision-making factor. Do I want something capable on the road and capable in the dirt, CF Moto? Do I want something that's really good for doing long distances on backcountry travel than this? And I come away really impressed with that, actually. And actually riding it today, and then back to back with all the other bikes, it makes you realise how refined it is, how well delivered everything works, the clutch feel, the gear lever throw, the front brake feel, the plushness of the suspension, the way it deals with the, the undulations of a typical Devon back road, which is a real good test for a bike. I mean, the Triumph 400X is standard on those typical Devon back roads, it falls apart. With the Rally Raid rear shock, it elevates it to a better place, but the back roads of Devon really do upset a poorly set up bike. And this shone today. It did feel big. It did feel like, as I say, a class above the rest of the bikes here. And I think that's why, I've never gone down the avenue of adding a twin-cylinder 500 bike before, because I had a CB 500X with a Rally Raid kit on, and nobody really gelled with it on these sort of back road days that I do. They felt it was a bit too big, a bit too unwieldy. But this, oddly, has got a lot of favour with the 6 guys today and the 6 guys yesterday. What's the difference? You know what? I think the difference between this and a modified CB500X is this was designed to be like this from the get-go. The foot peg position is good, the bar position is good, the wheel size is obviously a 21 and an 18. When you start making changes to a 500X, you still got to get the 19-inch front and the 17-inch rear, so it's compromised there, and the foot pegs are in the wrong place and the handlebars are in the wrong place. Yes, it's capable, but this, from ground up, is more capable. Is it as good as a Japanese bike? I think this is the point where we have to accept that China has elevated Japan. I don't care what anybody says. They'll say, no, the Japan. You know what? There's a bad case of Stockholm syndrome going around with the Japanese. I mean, yes, they build reliable bikes, but hell, have they stopped innovating, delivering exciting new bikes? And that's where China, this isn't a copy. This is something different. This is something the market hasn't currently got. Same with the CF Moto 450. And I do think I have to celebrate that as offering as something exciting, something different, something capable. Is the quality as good as the Japanese? I think it's pretty much getting there. Is the parts availability is good? Getting there, but they're the last sort of nails in the wall before the picture is complete. And I think it's an interesting time. I mean, I know people talk negatively about the influence of China, and I understand why. I do get that. But from just focusing on the motorcycle, they're doing great things. They're doing great things with existing tech. Now, you could say, well, it's just a Honda engine. Yes, it is. But look what they've blessed it with. 2 tanks, 40 litres, 600 miles. I mean, they've given us what a lot of us have asked for. Now, is this bike too niche to be mainstream? I think it is. I think that's the issue. It's got a feature on it, a twin tank setup, that is actually really useful. But is it useful as enough or as crowd pleasing enough as electronic suspension or a quick shifter? They're the sort of things that the casual rider seems to want. Does a casual rider need a 600 mile tank? No. Does that mean that this is always going to be a niche bike? Yes. Does that mean that a lot of people are going to see this as too expensive at $7.5 grand? Yes. And unfortunately, the brand doesn't back up the bike. If this has got a Honda badge on it, it'd be the best value Honda ever made. And that's the difference. It's not the bike, it's the brand. The brand adds the desirability and the worth. And it's a shame we think like that, but it's inevitable, I guess. But this is definitely a $7.5 grand bike, but it's not a $7.5 grand company, if you know what I mean. And I think, when this came down to 6.5, to me, it was the bargain it needed to be to get it out the door. There are other bikes that have done it so well. The Vosges 200 Rally coming at $4 grand. Wow, bargain, I'll have one of those. Himalayan 411, $4 grand. Oh, I'll have one of those. Benelli TRK 502 when that came out, cheap bike, let's give it a go, let's go. Triumph 400X, again, they priced it at a point where people just went, wow, that's a lot of bike for the money. And unfortunately, the Rieju he still needs to establish the brand in order to sell the bike or be cheaper, because price sells. And it's a shame, I really think if more people tried this bike, rode this bike, saw this bike, had access to this bike, I think it would it will gain some traction because, as I say, as a travel bike, I can't think of a better bike I'd rather be on Spain it on. It was exciting to ride, it had enough power, it's not accelerative, it's not fast, it's not explosive, but it builds speed, it goes at a speed, it'll sit at 85 miles an hour. Now it's running, it'll give you some guts. And in the last few days, people have been really impressed with its quality. You know, so I'm glad I bought it. You know, it was a risk. It could have been seen as a big waste of money. And, you know, I did have trepidation about spending money that I'd worked hard to earn on a bike that was so, you know, in a way unsupported, unloved by its own producer. You know, I'd really love to see them do more to get this in front of people. They're not going to be at the NEC, right? You aren't going to be at the NEC. You know, what a way to put 100,000 people's eyes on this bike. You only need 100 to buy it. You only need 50 to buy it. And that investment would be worthwhile. So, I can't remember where I was going, but, yeah, just in conclusion, I'm really glad I've given it a go. Would I encourage you to buy one? It's always difficult, isn't it? I don't want to encourage you to spend your money on something that might not work out in the long term. But I certainly recommend you try one, and I certainly recommend sitting on one. And I would certainly try and convey the message back to the people who produce this in China, the company behind this, and say, carry on doing this, because this is innovative. This is what we would call a boutique motorcycle, I think. You know, we would celebrate, if this came out of a UK workshop, we'd think we were the bee's knees, but it's not. And I started to realise that the issue isn't actually the Chinese, the issue is the Europeans. The Chinese are building the bike. It's the Europeans who are creating the smoke screen, the illusion of it being a European brand, of having European equity, and therefore putting a price on that. It's not the Chinese who are doing that. It's not the Chinese who are causing the issue in this bike building market. It's that middleman who I've mentioned in other videos. You know, the man in China and the men in China building this, they're onto something. They're building good stuff. Connect that with the consumer who knows and understands the product and is prepared to pay the price for it, and I think we're onto great things, which is exactly what CF Moto are doing. You know, that strategy is clear as day, and it's working really well. This just needs a bit of clarity. This actually just needs a Chinese badge on it, and it needs to be $5.5 grand, and then it would explode, because the bike stands up on its own 2 feet. It's a very good bike. I very much enjoyed riding it, and if I had to choose between this and the CF Moto, the only thing keeping me on the CF Moto would be the fact that it's a better trail bike. Therefore, if I had to keep one bike, the CF Moto would do everything I asked of it. This would limit what I could do on the off-road. But if you'd say to me, which would you go around on Spain on next week, or ride to Morocco on next week, this or the CF Moto, it would be this. So I think it very much ticked the box and fulfilled its obligation or its purpose as a travel motorcycle. You know, that's for people who've travelled on a motorcycle and experienced being out there on their own and dealing with the world. This ticks a lot of boxes. Obviously, the main ingredient of a travel bike is reliability, and on that, I don't know yet. It's too early days. 2,500 miles is not enough to say whether it's reliable or not. Yes, my knobs fell off. If that's all that falls off in the next 10,000 miles, 20,000 miles, 30,000 miles, happy days. So yeah, interesting bike. The most interesting bike of this year by a mile. So there we go. Cheers.